5 years is a long time to get good at being alone. Daniel Harper didn't call it loneliness. He called it routine. A small house on Riverside Avenue, a boy who needed breakfast before school, work that came in bursts like weather and left his hands smelling of oil and metal. He fixed things because that was what made sense. A washer that wouldn't spin, a porch step that sagged, a latch that didn't catch. If you stayed busy, you didn't have to sit with the empty places. That Tuesday in October, rain started in the afternoon and didn't stop. The kind of Oregon rain that didn't shout. It just stayed, steady and quiet, turning the world soft around the edges. Daniel was in his garage, bent over an old washing machine he'd promised to look at for Mrs. Patterson. He already knew the part would cost more than the machine, and he was already doing the math in his head. If he bought it himself, he'd be short on groceries. If he didn't, she'd be stuck carrying laundry to her sister's place. He heard the door from the kitchen open. "Dad, I'm home." Miles stood in the doorway with wet hair and a grin that always landed somewhere between mischief and hope. 9 years old now. Taller than Daniel expected. Still carrying pieces of his mother in his face, in the way he lifted his eyebrows when he was proud of himself. Daniel tossed him a towel. "How was school?" "Wet," Miles said, then smiled wider. "Mr. Peterson said my volcano was the best. The one that almost took out our kitchen table?" "That was the first version," Miles said, offended. "The new one has better structure." Daniel ruffled his hair. "Structural integrity matters." "It does," Miles agreed, like a little old man. By dinner, the house smelled like spaghetti and garlic because spaghetti was one of the 3 things Daniel could make without thinking. Miles did homework at the table, grumbling about fractions the way kids grumbled about storms and chores. "You'll use fractions," Daniel told him, "in life." Miles sighed. "Life should stop using fractions." Daniel smiled, but he felt tired in his bones. Not the good tired that came from a long hike. The kind that came from carrying everything alone for too many years. When Miles finally went to bed, Daniel cleaned the kitchen in silence. The rain tapped the windows like someone trying not to bother him. He stood for a moment in the living room, looking at the spot where Sarah's favorite chair used to be, before he gave it away because seeing it hurt too much. At 8:45 there was a knock, not the polite knock of a delivery, not the loud knock of a friend. Just one careful knock like the person on the other side wasn't sure they should be there. Daniel's first thought was Miles, his second was trouble. He opened the door. Evelyn Moore stood on his porch, soaked through, hair pulled back in a loose knot, mascara streaked down her cheeks. She lived across the street in the blue house and always seemed quiet, like she moved through life without asking for space. Tonight she looked like she'd run out of strength. "I'm sorry," she said, voice thin. "I know it's late." Daniel stepped back without thinking. "Come in." She walked inside like the warmth might disappear if she moved too fast. Daniel found a towel and put it over her shoulders. He turned the kettle on because it gave his hands something to do. They sat in the living room with mugs between them, listening to the rain. Evelyn stared at her hands as if they belonged to someone else. Finally, she lifted her eyes to his. "Daniel," she said, and her throat worked hard around the name. "I need to ask you something, and it's going to sound impossible." He didn't rush her. He waited the way he had learned to wait with a grieving child, with a sick wife, with himself. Evelyn took a breath that shook. "I want a baby," she said, "and I need help. I'm asking you." The words settled between them, heavy and quiet, like the house itself was listening. Daniel's mouth went dry. His first instinct was to protect his son, his life, the careful walls he'd built. His second instinct was something older and softer. He looked at Evelyn's face, the hurt written plain on it, and felt the room tilt into a future he hadn't planned. Outside, the rain kept falling. Inside, Daniel sat very still, as if moving too quickly might break something that couldn't be repaired. Daniel didn't answer right away. He held his mug with both hands, not because the tea was hot, but because it gave him something to hold. Evelyn watched him like she was bracing for a door to close. "I'm not asking for a relationship," she said quickly. "Not marriage, not romance. I'm not trying to trap you, I just—" Her voice cracked. She swallowed. "I just can't live inside this emptiness anymore." Daniel heard the word emptiness and felt it land in a place he usually kept locked. He leaned forward a little. "Why me?" Evelyn's eyes filled again. Because you're a good dad. Daniel let out a small breath, almost a laugh, but it didn't have any humor in it. You don't know me. I've watched you, she said, then looked ashamed like she'd admitted something wrong. Not in a creepy way, just across the street. I see you walk miles to the bus stop. I see you carry groceries with one hand and still make sure he's not stepping in puddles. I hear you talk to him like his thoughts matter. Daniel's throat tightened. He wasn't used to being seen. Evelyn's fingers moved around the rim of her mug. I tried the other ways. Clinics, forms, waiting rooms that smell like disinfectant. I tried for 2 years. It never happened. And every time it didn't work, it felt like losing her all over again. Her? Daniel asked softly. Evelyn's eyes dropped. My daughter, Sophie. She was 6 when she died. Daniel felt his chest go tight, the way it did when grief touched grief. Evelyn told him the basics, not like a story, but like a list she'd memorized to survive. A husband named Michael. A park. A drunk driver. A phone call that split her life in 2. She didn't dress it up. She didn't try to make it easier to hear. Daniel listened without interrupting. Outside the rain eased, but the house felt heavier. When Evelyn finally stopped talking, her shoulders slumped like she'd been holding herself upright by force. Daniel nodded once. I'm sorry. I hate when people say that, she whispered, then shook her head. Not because it's wrong, just because it doesn't fix anything. It doesn't, Daniel said, but I'm still sorry. Evelyn's eyes flicked to the hallway toward the stairs where Miles slept. You lost your wife. Daniel didn't ask how she knew. Grief had its own way of traveling through a neighborhood. Cancer, he said, fast, mean. He stared at the floor for a moment. Miles was 4. Evelyn's face softened, and in that softening, Daniel saw something he didn't expect. Understanding, not pity. Not that distant look people got when they didn't know what to say. Just the simple, quiet recognition of someone who'd been in the same storm. So when I asked you, Evelyn said, it wasn't because I think you owe me anything. It's because you know what it means to love someone so much you can't breathe without them. Daniel swallowed. He thought of Sarah's laugh, the way she used to brush Miles' hair back from his forehead. He thought of hospital lights and the smell of bleach. He thought of going home alone for the first time, carrying a bag of her things that still held her scent. Evelyn's voice grew smaller. If you say no, I'll understand. I'll stay across the street and I'll never bring it up again. I just had to ask. I had to try. Daniel looked at her, really looked. She wasn't asking like a person making a casual request. She was asking like a person who had run out of road. His mind filled with practical questions. Money, legal stuff, Miles. What kind of father would he be to a child who lived across the street? What kind of neighbor would he be to Evelyn afterward? Then he pictured Miles at the dinner table, asking for a brother or sister like it was the simplest thing in the world. Daniel set his mug down carefully. I can't answer tonight, he said. I need time. Evelyn blinked hard, and that's fair. And Evelyn, Daniel added, because the truth needed to be said. I'm not angry you came. I'm not offended. I'm just scared. She gave a small nod like she understood that word too well. How long, she asked. A few days, he said. Let me think. Let me talk to myself about what I can actually do. Evelyn stood, the towel sliding from her shoulders. Daniel picked it up and handed it back to her. Their hands brushed, and both of them noticed it, not in a romantic way, but in a human way, a reminder that they were real, and this was real. At the door, she paused. You didn't say no, she whispered. Thank you. Daniel didn't correct her, he couldn't. He watched her cross the street, a dark shape moving through the wet night. And when her porch light clicked on, he felt something shift inside him. Not love, not agreement. Just the quiet sense that the life he'd been holding still was about to start moving again, whether he wanted it to or not. Upstairs, Miles slept with his mouth slightly open, one arm flung off the bed like he owned the world. Daniel stood in the doorway of his son's room for a long time, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing. Then he turned off the hall light and went to bed, knowing sleep would not come easy. Daniel didn't sleep much. He lay on his back, staring at the ceiling, hearing old sounds in the dark. The hum of the refrigerator, the soft creak of the house settling, rain dripping from the gutter outside like a slow clock. His mind kept walking in circles. He pictured Evelyn's face on his couch, wet hair stuck to her cheek, that look in her eyes like she'd been holding her breath for years. Then he pictured Miles, small at 4 years old, asking where Mom went, and Daniel having no words that could hold a child's grief. By morning, he'd made coffee he didn't taste and toast Miles barely touched. "You're quiet," Miles said, watching him over his bowl. "Just tired," Daniel answered. Miles studied him like he was older than 9. "Did something happen?" Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it again. "Just grown-up stuff." Miles shrugged the way kids do when they don't like an answer but accept it anyway. "Can you sign my museum slip tonight?" "Yeah," Daniel said, "tonight." After the bus pulled away, Daniel stood at the end of the driveway with his hands in his pockets. Across the street, Evelyn's curtains were still closed. He should have let it sit. He'd promised himself a few days to think. But something in him didn't like the space between last night and whatever came next. It felt too much like waiting for bad news again. He crossed the street before he could talk himself out of it and knocked. It took a moment, then the door opened. Evelyn looked like she'd been crying even in her sleep. No makeup, hair loose, a sweatshirt that hung off one shoulder. Her eyes widened. "Daniel, I'm not here with an answer," he said quickly. I have questions." She stepped back. "Come in." Her house was clean in a way that felt careful, like she didn't leave messes because messes suggested someone might stay. No pictures on the walls, no toys in corners, no little signs that a life had ever been lived there. Daniel sat on the edge of her couch the same way she'd sat on his. He took a breath. "Have you really thought this through?" "Yes," she said, "over and over." "This isn't a wish," Daniel said. "It's a person, and people don't stay simple." "I know," Evelyn replied, and her voice didn't shake this time. "I was a mother. I remember the weight of it. I remember the joy, too." Daniel nodded slowly. "What are you asking from me exactly? You said no strings. But a child is a string, Evelyn. It ties you forever." She didn't flinch. "I'm not asking you to disappear. I'm asking you to choose your place in it. If you want to be involved, I want that. If you want to be the child's father in every real way, I want that too. I just didn't want to force it." Daniel stared at her. "And Miles?" Evelyn's hands tightened in her lap. "I've thought about him more than you know. I would never want to hurt him. If you decide this isn't right for him, then it isn't right." Daniel felt the answer settle in his chest. She wasn't careless. She wasn't asking like it was a quick fix. He asked about money, healthcare, work. She explained she did software consulting from home and could support a child. She wasn't asking him to pay her bills. She wasn't asking for rescue. Then Daniel asked the question that made his ears burn. "The method," he said, looking down at his hands. "Are you talking about a clinic or—" "Either," Evelyn said gently, not teasing. "The clinic is expensive and not always successful. The other way is complicated. But I'm not here to pressure you into anything you don't want." Silence sat between them. Daniel heard himself ask, "Why did you choose me and not someone you're dating?" Evelyn's gaze softened. "Because I'm not dating. I haven't. I couldn't. I tried once. I felt like I was cheating on a grave." Daniel knew that feeling. The guilt that came from laughter. The shame of enjoying a sunset when someone you loved didn't get to see it. Evelyn took a slow breath. "Daniel, can I ask you something back?" He nodded. "Why didn't you say no?" Daniel's throat tightened. He could have lied. He could have said he was being polite. He could have blamed shock. But he told the truth. "Because I know what it's like to wake up and feel nothing," he said quietly. "And the only thing that brought me back to life was being Miles's dad. When you said you needed a reason to live, I understood." Evelyn's eyes filled, but she didn't look away. Daniel stood, feeling the weight of the room, the weight of what they were even talking about. "I still need time," he said. "But I want us to slow down. If we do this, we do it with our eyes open. We get to know each other. We put things on paper. We don't build a child's life on a desperate night." Evelyn nodded, relief and fear mixing together on her face. "Okay, yes, I can do that." At her door, Daniel paused with his hand on the knob. "I'll talk to Miles when I'm sure," he said. "Not before." "I understand," Evelyn said. "Thank you for coming over. Thank you for treating this like it matters." "It does," Daniel said, and meant it. He stepped back into the wet morning and walked home, feeling both heavier and steadier. Nothing was decided yet, but something had begun. Daniel tried to go back to normal. He fixed Mrs. Patterson's washing machine by buying the used part himself, then told her it was a discount he'd talked the supplier into. She pressed a 20 into his hand anyway and told him not to argue. He didn't. He picked Miles up from the bus stop. He made dinner. He listened to a long explanation about why volcanoes should be allowed in school cafeterias. But every quiet moment pulled him back to that blue house across the street. On Friday evening, while Miles built something loud out of Legos, Daniel sat at the kitchen table and stared at a blank sheet of paper. He'd written one word at the top. Questions. Then he added another word below it. Miles! That was the real problem. Not the money, not the neighbors, not the awkwardness of it all. Miles. Daniel waited until after bedtime. Then he knocked on Evelyn's door again, this time with a steadier heart. She opened it like she'd been expecting him. They sat at her kitchen table. No tea, no big talk about grief. Just two people trying to be honest. I've been thinking about what you said, Daniel began. About choosing my place in it. Evelyn nodded, hands wrapped around a plain glass of water. I meant it. I don't think I can be just a donor, Daniel said. That wouldn't sit right with me. If there's a child, I'm not built to walk past them on the sidewalk and pretend. Evelyn's eyes softened. I don't want you to pretend. And I can't do anything until we talk about legal stuff, Daniel continued. Agreements, custody, decision-making, all of it. I need it clear. Not because I don't trust you, but because people get scared when life gets messy, and a child deserves more than fear. I already looked into a lawyer, Evelyn said quietly. I can do that. Daniel let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. Good. He shifted in his chair. Second thing. I want us to get to know each other first, really. Not just grief stories and hard nights. I want to know what you like, what you hate, what you do on a Sunday morning. Because if we do this, we're tied together for life. Evelyn gave a small smile, almost shy. I read old mystery books and eat cereal for dinner when I'm sad. Daniel blinked. I also eat cereal for dinner when I'm tired. For the first time, her face changed into something lighter, a real smile, brief but warm. Third, Daniel said, and his voice tightened. Miles comes first, always. If anything about this starts to hurt him, we stop and we rethink. Do you understand? Evelyn's smile faded, but her gaze stayed steady. Yes, I understand. And Daniel, I care about him. I don't want to be another loss in his life. That hit him because it meant she'd already been thinking about the danger of becoming important to a child. Daniel nodded. Okay. They sat in silence a moment, the refrigerator humming behind them. Evelyn finally asked, So what does this mean? It means I'm not ready to say yes to the baby, Daniel said. But I am ready to say yes to the first step. Evelyn's breath caught. What's the first step? Dinner, he said. Tomorrow night, somewhere quiet, no pressure, just two neighbors getting to know each other like we should have years ago. Evelyn stared at him like she wasn't sure if she deserved something as normal as dinner. Then she nodded. Okay, I can do dinner. Daniel stood, feeling odd in his own skin. Like he was 16 and about to ask a girl out, only this wasn't about a dance. This was about life itself. At the door, Evelyn stopped him. Daniel, she said softly. Thank you for not treating me like I'm broken. He looked at her, at the tiredness around her eyes, at the strength it took to stand upright after losing a whole life. We're both broken, he said. That's not the part that scares me. What scares you? Daniel thought of Miles asleep down the hall, thought of Sarah's picture on the dresser. Getting it wrong, he admitted, and paying for it with the people I love. Evelyn's hand rested lightly on her belly, a habit like she was already holding space for a child. We'll go slow, she promised. We'll do it right. Daniel nodded and stepped out into the night. Across the street, his porch light was on. His house waited for him, familiar and steady. But for the first time in years, he wasn't walking back into the same old quiet. He was walking toward something new, one careful step at a time. The Italian place Daniel chose wasn't fancy. It sat off the highway 10 minutes out of town. The kind of restaurant with warm lights, worn wooden booths, and older couples who came every Friday like it was church. Nobody stared. Nobody cared who you were. They just ate their pasta and talked about their week. That was what Daniel wanted, a normal room for an abnormal conversation. Evelyn arrived in her own car and stood outside for a moment like she was deciding whether to walk in. She'd dressed simply, dark jeans, a soft sweater, her hair pulled back. She looked like herself again, if herself meant someone who had been living on half a breath. Daniel held the door open. "Hey." "Hey," she said, and her voice was steadier than it had been on his porch. They sat across from each other and stared at menus they didn't read. The quiet between them wasn't awkward. It was careful. Like both of them were learning a new language. "I haven't done this in a long time," Evelyn said. "Eat carbs?" Daniel asked. She gave a small laugh. "Sit across from someone and talk." Daniel nodded. "Me neither." When the waiter came, Daniel ordered spaghetti without thinking. Evelyn ordered soup and a side salad, then changed her mind and ordered the lasagna like she was tired of being careful. Halfway through dinner, Daniel realized they were talking like ordinary people. Evelyn told him she grew up in a small coastal town and learned early how to keep herself busy. She'd been the kind of kid who color-coded her homework and made lists for fun. Her mother used to say she was born with worry in her bones. Daniel admitted he'd been an electrician before Sarah got sick, and that starting his repair business wasn't a dream so much as a decision made out of necessity. "I got good at it," he said, "and I stayed." Evelyn watched him for a moment. "You built a life out of what you had left." Daniel didn't answer because it was too true. When she spoke about Michael, she didn't drown in it. She gave Daniel small, real details. How he sang off-key while making pancakes. How he cried during sad movies and pretended he didn't. How Sophie used to insist butterflies were tiny flying letters from heaven. Daniel found himself telling stories about Sarah without choking on the words. How she used to dance in the kitchen when the radio played old songs. How she could calm Miles down with one look when Daniel couldn't. They didn't compare losses. They didn't try to win grief. They just sat with it, shared it, and let it be. After dessert, they walked outside into damp evening air. The rain had stopped, but the sky still smelled like it. Evelyn stood by her car and pulled her sleeves over her hands. "There's something I need to tell you," she said, eyes fixed on the ground. "Before we go any further." Daniel's stomach tightened. "Okay." "I tried before," she said, "with a donor, a clinic, for 2 years. Daniel stayed quiet. "It never worked," she went on. "The doctor said there wasn't a clear reason. Sometimes it just doesn't happen. But I need you to know, this might not be easy. It might take a long time. Or it might not happen at all." Daniel exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of it. Then he nodded. "Thank you for telling me." Evelyn looked up, surprised. "That's all you're going to say?" "What do you want me to say?" Daniel asked gently. "That it'll definitely work? That I can promise you a baby?" Her eyes filled. "No. I can promise you honesty," Daniel said. "I can promise you we'll face whatever comes if we decide to try." Evelyn's shoulders dropped like she'd been carrying that secret in her ribs. "I'm scared," she whispered. Daniel thought of his own fear, the kind that lived in his chest like a lodged stone. "Me too," he said. "But fear doesn't get to make every decision for us." They stood there for a moment in the quiet, traffic moving in the distance like faraway water. Then Evelyn said, almost like she was speaking to herself, "I forgot what it felt like to be seen." Daniel didn't reach for her. He didn't rush anything. He just said, "You are." When he drove home, the neighborhood looked the same. Porch lights, wet sidewalks, the blue house across the street. But Daniel felt different, like he'd stepped out of his own shadow for a few hours and remembered that life could still surprise you. Inside, Miles had left a note on the counter in careful handwriting. "Dad, I did my homework. Don't forget the permission slip. Love you." Daniel held the paper for a long time, his thumb rubbing the edge. Across the street, Evelyn's porch light clicked off, and Daniel stood there in his kitchen feeling something small and steady begin to grow. Not a plan yet, not a promise, just a beginning that didn't feel so impossible anymore. The next few weeks moved quietly, like the town itself was giving them space. Dinner once a week became twice. Sometimes Evelyn came over with a store-bought pie and apologized for it like she'd committed a crime. Sometimes Daniel cooked spaghetti again and acted like it was a brand new invention. Miles was always polite, a little curious, but mostly he treated Evelyn like what she was, a neighbor, a friend. One afternoon, Daniel came in from the garage and found Miles at the kitchen table with Evelyn on the other side. His math book was open between them. Evelyn pointed at a fraction line. If you cut the pizza into 8 slices and you eat 3, how much is left? Miles frowned like he didn't trust pizza to be used for learning. 5. Evelyn nodded. 5/8. Miles looked up at Daniel. She makes fractions less annoying. Daniel set a bag of tools down and tried not to show how much that softened him. Later that night, after Evelyn went home, Miles brushed his teeth and climbed into bed. Daniel tucked him in the same way he always had, even though Miles pretended he was too old for it. "Dad," Miles said, voice smaller in the dark, "are you and Evelyn dating?" Daniel sat on the edge of the bed. "Not exactly." Miles waited. "We're spending time together," Daniel said, "getting to know each other." "Because of the baby thing?" Miles asked. Daniel took a slow breath. He'd been waiting for this moment, but it still felt like stepping onto thin ice. "Partly," he admitted. "She asked me for help having a baby. I haven't said yes or no yet." Miles's eyebrows pulled together. "Why would she ask you?" Daniel hesitated, then chose the truth that made sense for a 9-year-old. "Because she trusts me," he said, "and because she's been through something really sad and she wants to be a mom again." Miles was quiet, thinking. "Would the baby be your baby?" he asked. "Yes," Daniel said. "If we did it, it would be mine too." Miles stared at the ceiling. "So then, I'd be a brother." "You'd be a big brother," Daniel corrected gently. Miles didn't smile right away. He kept thinking, like he was building the idea piece by piece in his head. Then he asked the question Daniel didn't expect. "Would it make you happy?" Daniel's throat tightened. "I think it could," he said. "But what I care about most is you." Miles turned his head toward him. In the dim light, Daniel could see the serious set of his face. "I don't want you to be sad forever," Miles said. "You try not to be, but you are sometimes." Daniel swallowed hard. "I know." Miles shifted under the blanket. "Mom would want you to be happy." Hearing that from his son felt like someone pressing a hand to an old bruise. It hurt, but it also warmed. Daniel leaned down and kissed Miles's forehead. "Thank you." Miles made a face like he regretted being tender. "Don't make it weird." Daniel smiled. Too late. The next evening, Daniel crossed the street and asked Evelyn to sit with him on her porch. The air was cool, and the trees had started dropping leaves like small, tired flags. Daniel stared out at the quiet street. "I talked to Miles." Evelyn's breath caught. "What did he say?" "He asked questions," Daniel said, "and he surprised me." Evelyn kept her hands folded in her lap. Daniel could see her trying not to hope too hard. "He said he didn't want me sad forever," Daniel continued. "He said Sarah would want me happy." Evelyn's eyes filled fast. "He's a good boy." "He is," Daniel agreed. "But I'm not going to decide anything based only on a kid being sweet. I want to do this carefully." Evelyn nodded. "I do too." Daniel looked at her, really looked. "I'm leaning toward yes," he said quietly. "But not the way you asked on that first night. Not as a desperate jump." Evelyn's shoulders shook with a small exhale. "Then how?" "With steps," Daniel said. "Lawyer first, agreement first, and we keep getting to know each other. We don't rush. We make sure Miles stays steady. We make sure you're doing this because you want it, not because you're drowning." Evelyn wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. "I want it," she whispered. "I've wanted it for a long time." Daniel nodded. "Then I think we try." He didn't say it like a grand promise. He said it like a man setting down a heavy tool and picking up another. Evelyn's eyes closed. One quiet tear slid down, and when she opened them again, there was something in her face that hadn't been there before.
Life.
"Thank you," she said, voice small. "Thank you for not letting me do this alone." Daniel watched the streetlights come on one by one. "Just remember," he said softly, "this isn't just about making a baby." Evelyn nodded, her hand resting on her own heart as if she was keeping it steady. "I know," she said. "It's about making a family." They didn't make it dramatic. No candlelight, no big speeches. No pretending it was something it wasn't. They met with a lawyer in a plain office that smelled like coffee and printer paper. They wrote things down that felt cold on the page but kind in real life. Custody, medical decisions, finances. What happened if one of them got sick? What happened if one of them changed their mind? Daniel hated thinking about worst-case endings, but he hated leaving a child unprotected more. After that, they kept it simple. They kept having dinners. They kept letting Miles be part of the normal parts, not the adult parts. Evelyn came over on Saturday morning sometimes, when the sun was pale and the neighborhood was quiet, and helped Miles with his science notes while Daniel fixed whatever was broken in the garage. And slowly, in ways Daniel didn't know how to measure, Evelyn became a steady presence in their house, not as a replacement for Sarah, just as herself. One night in early December, after Miles was asleep and the dishes were done, Evelyn sat at Daniel's kitchen table and stared at her hands. "I'm scared," she said. Daniel dried the last plate and set it in the cabinet. "Me too." Evelyn let out a breath. "If we try and it doesn't work, I don't know if I can take that pain again." Daniel pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. "Then we'll face that pain together," he said. "But we're not living our lives based on what might go wrong." She nodded slowly, like she was borrowing his steadiness. They decided on a clinic, not because it felt romantic, but because it felt clean and clear. The first appointment was awkward in the way all medical things are awkward. Paperwork, waiting rooms, a nurse calling Evelyn's name like it was any other day. Daniel sat beside her, his knee bouncing under the chair, and realized his hands were shaking. Evelyn noticed and covered his fingers with hers. "Still want to run?" she whispered. "Only a little," Daniel admitted. She gave him the smallest smile. "Good, me too." It took months, more time than Daniel expected, and more disappointment than he was ready for. Evelyn would come to his porch after another negative test, shoulders slumped, eyes glassy, and Daniel would make tea without asking, the way he used to make soup for Sarah when she couldn't eat. Miles noticed too. Children always notice. He didn't ask many questions. He just started leaving little notes on the counter in his careful handwriting. "It's okay, don't quit. You guys can do hard things." One warm day in late spring, Evelyn knocked again. This time she wasn't crying. She stood there breathing fast, like she'd run the whole way across the street even though it was only a few steps. Her face was pale, but her eyes were bright in a way Daniel had never seen. "I'm late," she said. Daniel's heart stuttered. "Late?" Evelyn nodded, one hand pressed to her mouth like she was holding the words in. "I took 3 tests," she whispered. "Daniel, they were all positive." For a second, Daniel couldn't move. Then he stepped forward and pulled her into his arms, careful like she was made of glass. Evelyn shook against him, laughing and crying at the same time. "I didn't think it would happen," she said into his shoulder. "I didn't think I'd ever get this back." Daniel held her tighter, and the first thought that came wasn't fear, it was wonder. That night, they told Miles at the kitchen table. Daniel tried to keep his voice calm, tried to make it sound steady and normal. But Miles saw right through him. He stared for a moment, then his face split into a grin. "So I really am going to be a big brother." Daniel nodded. "If everything goes the way it should." Miles walked around the table and hugged Evelyn carefully, like he already understood she needed gentleness. Then he hugged Daniel quick and strong. "Okay," Miles said, pulling back. "Then we're going to do this." The months that followed were full of small, ordinary miracles. Evelyn's belly grew. The baby kicked when Daniel's hand rested there. Miles talked to it sometimes when he thought nobody was listening. Daniel fixed a crib in the nursery and felt his throat tighten when he heard the soft click of the last screw. Some neighbors whispered, some smiled, some brought casseroles without asking questions. Life stayed messy, but it also stayed real. One evening near the end of the pregnancy, Daniel and Evelyn sat on the porch in quiet air, watching the sky fade into darker blue. Evelyn leaned her head on his shoulder. "Thank you," she said, "for opening the door that night." Daniel thought of all the ways he almost didn't, all the ways fear had tried to keep him safe. He looked through the window at the warm light inside, where Miles's backpack sat by the stairs, where the house held signs of a life that was still growing. "I didn't save you," he said softly. Evelyn lifted her eyes to him. "No?" He shook his head. "We saved each other, and we're still doing it." Evelyn's hand found his, their fingers lacing together like it was the most natural thing in the world. They sat in the quiet for a long time, listening to the night sounds, letting the moment be enough. And if this story stayed with you, stay close. There are always more gentle truths waiting here on Stories from the Heart.